Okay, let's get started here. They don't drive us out of this room like they do the other one, but I do want to get us started so that we can cover all the stuff. Now, a couple administrative things right at the beginning. This coming weekend is the weekend that you need to be working on your essay, the first of the two 5-page essays. Okay, and that I want you to direct your attention in this one, if you can, to this issue of natural law that we're going to be talking about. It's going to be such a core issue in the course. So we're going to be covering some of this today. As you can see, we have our paraphernalia out here. So we're going to be covering this. So what I want you to do is I want you to I want you to explain to me what your understanding is of natural law and what the variants are on natural law, the different types of natural law that are talked about in the readings. Now, what I've done is I have given to you a handful of shorter readings. This natural law reading from the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and also another little 3-pager from the Encyclopedia of Philosophy on the philosophical ideas of nature. And I've given you the Fordham Law Review article, which is sort of the garden variety law review article about the role of natural law in the formation of the actual Constitution. And then I've given you this, which is a rather well-known piece, the Harvard Law Review article about the background of natural law. And what I want to direct your attention to here, to help you focus on the paper, is, and I've done it a couple times already, but that there is in the short little article on natural law from the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, this little few-page thing that we have here, that I directed your attention to the next to the last page of this, where it talks about the relationship between natural law and reason. And you'll notice that it said, where it said that the natural law was what reason is able to discover. And natural law is discovered by reason, but difficulties still remain because it says that over the debate over how to interpret the term reason, which was sometimes equated with intuition, sometimes with the cool observation of nature itself, and sometimes with decisions of the law of non-contradiction. Okay, and in this respect, it is instructive to compare the different arguments employed in their various treatments of natural law. So what I'm going to make it clear to you that there's a range of back reasoning that goes on when people use the term natural law, that some people refer to a simple intuition, as is suggested in the article in the Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And it's not clear what they mean by intuition. Some of it is kind of unconscious recollection of patterns of things that you think are right and wrong, and you develop some kind of an intuitive vision of that. There's intuition that is used in the way that John Rawls refers to it in a considerably different form in his theory of justice. There is the cool observation of nature that they refer to by the utilization of just your 5 senses, that you're able to see the tides coming and going, you're able to see the seasons changing, you're able to see night and day, you're able to see certain phenomena that occur in nature, such as watching the animals, how they mate, how they survive, how some of them, the fittest, survive over the less fit, etc. So there's this third option of a cool observation of nature and the things that take place there. And then they refer to this the law of non-contradiction. What this means is simple rational reasoning, that you learn how to engage in rational thinking, in logical thinking. And one of the major characteristics of logical thinking is the non-contradiction within the pattern that you're attempting to elucidate. But then there is this one that I highlighted for you, which was Professor Crane Brinton's reference in December of 1967 to this rather extraordinary insight that he had come to, that in all of his years of reading in intellectual history, he had come to determine that the most important single insight of all the greatest minds is that the human species was right on the brink of a major new step in our biological evolution, and that we were evolving a new faculty like seeing or hearing, that in fact that gave us direct, immediate experiential access to the unitive phenomenon that bonds every ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical cosmos into one unified harmonic whole. And that by means of this direct experience, like seeing light or colors or hearing sounds, that we could directly and experientially discern the unitive phenomenon, so that we knew instinctively what form of conduct on the part of human beings, either individual or collective, is either harmonious with or disharmonious to the natural order of the universe. Now this is the most profound of the various references to natural law, but this is a number of them that are available for you as candidates. And what I want you to do is explain to me what it is, based on your readings, you think is the most efficacious or reasonable use of natural law relating to law. Now, I've pointed out those few articles that I had you read, most of which are pretty short, but I would like to direct your attention to one more. Now this is for those of you who are probably philosophy majors that really want to dig into this particular issue to get the very most you can out of this course. And that is one of the articles that I had Toby put up for you. It's this online library of liberty. It's a major article that was written in 1936 by a Dr. Roman, R-O-M-M-E-N. It's a major article on the history of the sociology of the theory of natural law. And it actually tracks back into the ancient Greeks, where he talks about particular philosophers that began to talk about natural law in the various phases that it has gone through, where it was basically usurped entirely by the people who replaced this idea of a direct experiential sense of unity with simple rational reasoning. And it's an article that's like 100 pages long, but and I'm not assigning it to you. I'm just saying that if you want to have a deeper, more detailed understanding of the historical evolution of this concept of natural law, that you might want to take a look at this. And again, it's just a matter of reviewing it and grokking how extraordinary this entire evolution of this idea has become. Yes.
That's under the recommended readings, right?
Yes, it's in the readings, and it's been given. It's up on eCommons, and it's available for you. Okay. Now, however, today what I want to do is I want to go into the specific context in which you're going to encounter natural law. We're going to be arguing in this course that natural law is the recourse that intelligent women and men will take to trying to deal with an irrational or authoritarian state that is getting out of control and is falling into under the sway of a narrow few, of an oligarchy. And you'll see in the writings of Heinrich Röhm that he wrote his major article in response to Adolf Hitler. And the fact that in Germany, in the rise of the Third Reich, they were taking careful steps to make sure that laws were passed, specifically authorizing the things that they were doing, all the way to confiscating the property of Jewish people, to excluding gypsies from the country, to giving the powers to Adolf Hitler, co-joining the powers, dissolving the parliament, the Reichstag. All of these things were done pursuant to the law in Germany. And so that those who were opposed to what was happening found it necessary to revisit the previously discredited concept of natural law. And this is what his article is all about. That's why he tracks the history of it. And we're going to have Professor Paul Lee come in for one lecture. I'll give you some advance notice as to when it's going to be. Dr. Paul Lee was the TA for Paul Tillich at Harvard, and went on to teach ancient Greek philosophy at MIT, and then was the original professor of ancient Greek philosophy here at the university before they basically did away with it. To replace it, I think, with physics or another chemistry course. And so that they don't have the course available anymore. But I'm going to have him come in and talk with you about some of the ancient origins in Greek culture of this concept of natural law. And he'll explain that to you. But as I say, what I want to do today is I want to put it in context for you, so that it isn't fair for a professor who happens to believe in the preference of one or another of the worldviews to simply pitch it to you as though that was the only worldview. So that you need to really understand the other alternatives.
Philosophy 108.
Pardon?
Philosophy 108, ancient Greek.
Well, I don't know that he just told me that they'd eliminated it from the curriculum. It may have been eliminated as a requirement for the curriculum.
Yeah.
But so the bottom line is that as I said, I don't want you to get the impression that I'm trying to foist one particular worldview on you. But I want you to understand the specifics of this particular worldview of natural law, because it plays such a fundamental role in the creation of the Constitution. And when faced with the rise of the oligarchy that we're seeing now, for example, just last night, Marco Rubio announced his candidacy for the presidency. And in case you didn't notice it, right up behind him there was a big banner that said, "A New American Century." And the project for a New American Century is a major fascist organizing operation that's going on in the country right now, led by Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz and Elliot Abrams and David Addington, the guys that were the authors of the torture memos. That so that you have Cheney saying things in his interview on HBO, saying things like, when they said, don't you think that waterboarding and putting people in cramped down little boxes and suffocating them in the box and stuff like that, don't you think that's torture? And he said, well, what are you going to do? Stand on principle or do what's necessary? That was his response. And he basically takes the position that whatever it is the executive wants to do, it's not unlawful. Very much like Richard Nixon said in his interview with the British journalist David Frost, right? And when he said, well, when you were ordering these burglaries to break into the psychiatrist of Daniel Ellsberg, didn't you understand that was illegal? And he said, well, if it's ordered by the president, it can't be illegal. You see? And so this is a dramatic example of this concept of positivist law, where they postulate that anything that the state does pursuant to a proper procedure is in fact lawful. As they pointed out in that very first article, that any concept of natural law necessarily has to reject that proposition. But what we need you to do is to get a little deeper understanding of that what are the different avenues of natural law pursuant to which they think that they're effectively negating that concept of whatever it is that the sovereign does is law and it's legitimate. Okay, so what I had done is in the last lecture I had sort of explained to you the context in which I had ended up going back to Harvard University thinking I was going to go back doing my PhD work in philosophy and ended up being assigned to the Divinity School because Dr. Ralph Potter was there. And Dr. Ralph Potter was the professor of comparative social ethics at Harvard University. And so John Rawls thought that was the person with whom I should be studying and doing my thesis. So I went back there in the fall of 1973 and began the course and was doing the master's degree, in which you'd take the 2 full years of courses and then you would write your master's thesis. And the way that Dr. Potter used to have us do this, and we had a class of about 100 kids in each class. They were a little older. They were all graduate school people by that time. But what he would do is he would say, look, I want you to pick a particular issue of public policy. And then I want you to read all the major thinkers in this area. And then I want you to lay them out on a bar graph of where they fall with regard to the proposals that they're making as to how to address and solve this particular public policy problem. For example, the issue of nuclear first strike. This was a big hot item going on back in the 70s, that there were advocates inside the United States administration that thought that we had to launch first, that we had the right to use a first strike nuclear weapon. So that, for example, if we told China that if you come across the Yangtze River from North Korea across this line, we're going to nuke you. That we're going to use our nuclear weapons unilaterally, take the first strike. And there are people that were advocating that it was perfectly moral and appropriate to use nuclear weapons, even in a conventional warfare setting, to win the day.
We already did that once.
We didn't do it once. We did it twice. But the bottom line is that there are others who suggest that we could and we need to be prepared to launch on warning. And that is, if we got a warning from our satellites that the Soviet Union was fueling up its nuclear weapons, that we had the authority to launch our weapons first and to strike them just with a warning. And then they had the other people advocating that you not be authorized to launch the weapons until they had actually launched against us and we had verified that the target was certain and that it was within our territory. So there were a whole range of debates, positions being taken on this issue of the first strike nuclear weapons. And so Dr. Potter said, for example, you might want to take that issue and explicate the different positions that have been taken by people. Same thing on abortion. Same thing on the Equal Rights Amendment. You might want to take the issue of homelessness and what percentage of the resources of a community should be devoted to addressing the issue of homelessness. But what he would do is he wanted those of us, the master's degree candidates, to pick one of these issues and write your master's thesis on this. Pick the public policy issue and write your paper on that. And what I ended up writing my thesis on, the master's thesis, was the debate that goes on in the human family as to the most efficacious manner by means of which to communicate to others the substantive content of mystical experience. And he and I had a long discussion about the legitimacy of that topic, because he said, well, that's not like abortion, and it's not like nuclear first strike. You know, you're really digging into something that is a little more cosmic and a little more difficult to deal with. I said, well, that's what I'm here for. You know, that I don't want to, write one more master's thesis on nuclear first strike. You know, what I want to do is I want to get down to this issue. And then so he and I started having this discussion. I'd spent a lot of time with him in his office. I was older than most of the other master's students there because I've been out practicing law for a number of years. So the bottom line is that I want to explain to you what it is that he explained to me, to give you a basic methodology by means of which to address these issues of public policy, and in that context have you come to understand what this option is of natural law. So what I want to do is I want to show you today, I hope this thing works right, but what I want to show you is that what Dr. Potter told us was that one of the things that Talcott Parsons had recognized, Talcott Parsons was the head of the Department of Sociology at Harvard University for like about 40 years. And he is the man who came up with this left-right political spectrum. When you hear people refer to someone as being a right-winger or a left-winger, that's what this has to do with. That's either on the right end of the political spectrum or the left end of the political spectrum. But that comes from Talcott Parsons. Because what Dr. Potter was telling us is that Talcott Parsons had discovered that when you present a given public policy challenge to a given community that is adequately large, and diverse, that what will happen is that our human family will divide ourselves into 5 different groups that will respond to the challenge with categorically different proposals as to how that challenge should be met. And what Talcott Parsons did is he set forth this thesis as a bar graph of like this. And what he said is that at one extreme there is a group that will end up being defined as what he referred to as right systematists. These are people on the extreme end of the political spectrum who are completely systematic about their thinking. And he said at the other end of the spectrum for the human community is a group that he called left systematists. And just inside the political spectrum on the right are what he called right marginalists. And on the left, he called them left marginalists. And not to anyone's surprise, there was a group in the middle that he called middle marginalists. Okay, and so Dr. Potter was explaining all of this to us and just saying that here they are. These are the groups, the kind of groups that they fall into. And what Dr. Potter was doing as a PhD student studying under Talcott Parsons back in the late 50s and early 60s, that Ralph Potter had kind of addressed the kind of obvious question that you'll ask yourself is, well, what are the criteria? What are the criteria by means of which a person ends up as a right systematist or a middle marginalist or a left marginalist? What are the criteria that go into making up this particular category? Let me. Have I got another transparency here? I forgot that I'm going to need a second one here. Yes. Okay. And so what Ralph Potter pointed out was that he had come to the conclusion that what causes a person to fall into one or another of these 5 categories of people is, he said, it was a question of how that person answered 4 fundamental questions concerning ultimate reality. And that the first of these was the cosmological question. And this is the question of how the physical universe came into being. Now, I've touched upon this just in passing in the first few discussions that we had, but I want to get into some detail on this now. What this has to do is what you think, either consciously or unconsciously, about how the entire physical reality that you find yourself in actually came into existence. Because you have this sense that you came into existence at a particular time. You were conceived and gestated in your mother's womb, and you were born into the world, and you pass out of the world and die. And trees rise and fall, and even mountains rise and fall, and oceans rise and fall. Everything sort of has a beginning or an end. And so there is a particular cosmological position that, in fact, the universe must have had a very particular beginning, and it probably has a very particular end. And so this is one particular theory of cosmology. In fact, as it turns out, the right systematists have a very particular thesis for their cosmological belief. And they believe that the universe, the entire universe, began with a Big Bang. That there was a point at which the entire universe was as small as the size of the head of a pin. And that somehow the polarity of the attraction of all of the component elements of the universe at that point, the polarity reversed itself and generated this huge explosion. Only it wasn't an explosion like just from the center out. It was of a different nature. That every single unit of matter in that small condensed universe immediately repelled every other one. And it generated this gigantic nuclear explosion. And that the impetus of that explosion drove every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the universe out and away from every other one at the same time. And that there was therefore this consistent expansion that was going on from the micro instant of that Big Bang, that there was this expansion going on of every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe moving out and away from every other one, causing this kind of exponential expansion on the part of the universe. And that every single element that makes up the periodic tables was disintegrating into its lesser constituent elements. And that every single element is made up of just other elements. And that it goes through a radioactive decay, and that the half-life of that particular element is what designates how long it takes for half of all of that mass to disintegrate into its smaller constituent parts. And then each one of those smaller constituent elements itself in turn, pursuant to its own atomic rate of breakdown, of decay, decays into its lesser constituent elements. And that process of expansion and concomitant disintegration is going on to the point where there'll come a point in time where every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire universe will be expanded out and out of contact with every other one. And at that particular point, it will continue, because of the momentum of the expansion, to continue out into no thingness. And that this is the basic cosmological assumption of adherence to the right systematist worldview. Now the next issue of kind of cosmic fact that is one of these four pillar beliefs that distinguishes each one of these worldviews from another. The second of these is teleology, or the teleological question. And that is, assuming that the universe began with the Big Bang and is expanded, what process is it going to follow from this cosmological assumption? And as you see in the right systematists, the right systematists here have a view of entropy, is that everything is disintegrating and it's falling apart and it's expanding out into nothingness. And so you have both the cosmological and the teleological questions being answered completely consistently by adherence to the right systematist worldview. And the third fundamental question of fact is the ontological. The ontological question. And that is, as I've mentioned to you before in passing, is the nature of consciousness, of being itself. That how did consciousness come into being? If in fact there's these inanimate objects of the elements of the universe, of oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen and others, all the way up the periodic table, if that's all that exists at the beginning, how does consciousness come into being? This is, of course, is a subset of the larger question: how does life come into being? More importantly to us, life like us, this conscious. How does this issue of consciousness come into being? And what the right systematists argue, in answer to that question, is that consciousness is merely an epiphenomenon of the interaction between mass and energy.
Chance.
Pardon?
Is it chance?
Well, it's random. It's random. That in fact in the expansion and disintegration of matter in the universe, there are varying ratios of energy to mass at any given point in time and at any particular locus in the universe. But there are certain confluences of mass and energy that, when they come into relationship with each other, set up an epiphenomenon of consciousness. And so therefore, they answer the ontological question in a completely materialist manner, that is the nature of consciousness and its source. And then the fourth and final of these pillar questions, the four pillar questions, is epistemology, or the epistemological question. And that is, again, as I've touched on just briefly in the past, is that this is the question of what the means are by means of which any human being has the capacity to ascertain data that can be used to answer cosmological questions of this scale. Are we confined to our simple five senses of seeing, tasting, touching, feeling, etc., and hearing? Is that all that we have to work with, and that we collect the data and then we process it through our intellect? And that we can then, through applying this reason, we can only come to certain conclusions that are based on things that we can experience with our five senses. And that they come to the conclusion, employing this particular epistemology, they come to the conclusion that in fact the universe is basically heading to chaos. It is disintegrating into chaos. And what Ralph Potter explained then is that when in fact a given person has answered these four fundamental pillar questions in a completely internally and self-referentially consistent manner, what he ended up concluding, or what they ended up concluding, along with Dr. Ralph Potter, is that the answer to these questions, if you answer them in an internally and self-referentially consistent manner, leads to a particular mode of ethical reasoning. Now, when you think about it, this is perfectly logical. That if you're asking yourself, what do I do in this particular circumstance of an event that's facing you, some kind of a policy problem or a challenge of some sort, which your first thing you want to do is you want to figure out what's real, right? And you want to figure out what's going on in the context of which this problem arises. So you want to get some answers to basic fundamental aspects of reality. And so what you do is you seek out the answers to these four fundamental questions of cosmic reality, and you ground the answer to other problems based in that. And so that when you answer all four of these questions in a way that is, as I said, self-referentially and internally consistent, it generates a particular principle. You see, it generates a principle that is consistent to all of them. And so you discern inductively, out of the answers to those questions, you discern an operating principle. And when you apply this same principle to the workaday challenges that you face, the ethical questions that you face with regard to your relationship to others, how you should act toward private property, how you should act with regard to collective communal decisions that have been made by a majority of your fellow citizens, your ethical response to those challenges, if in fact you apply to each such situation this general principle that has been generated by your self-referentially and internally consistent set of answers to these four pillar questions, will in fact generate a mode of ethical reasoning. And that when you apply that to the general problems of the day, it will end up generating a philosophy. Lo and behold, there's philosophy. That when people say, well, what is philosophy all about? What is it you're doing? Well, what you're doing is you're trying to explore the thinking of our human family with regard to how, in fact, you address specific concrete problems and what principles you invoke in trying to do that.
So how does this operate to project specifically just five modes of ethical reasoning that then exist on a left-right scale?
That's what we're going to get to. I'm going to show you that in a second. Okay. So, but what this does is it generates the application of the mode of ethical reasoning that is derived pursuant to the principle that is generated by answering these questions in that way, that generates a philosophy. And under a philosophy, there is the whole category of political philosophy. Okay? There's the whole question of political philosophy. And what he discovered, what Talcott Parsons discovered, is that when in fact you provide the answers that are available, the set of self-referentially and internally consistent answers to those four cosmic questions, it generates a set of a set of principles that has generated a series of political philosophies. And they range from the right, from authoritarian, they're not right on that guy. Okay, an authoritarian worldview on the extreme right, and that is your right systematist worldview, political theory. And the one right inside of it is the right marginalist worldview is in fact a reactionary worldview. So you have an authoritarian worldview on the extreme right. You have the right marginalist worldview, a political theory of being reactionary. On the far left, you have the left systematist worldview, which is a utopian worldview. And the left marginalist worldview is in fact a progressive worldview. And then they have the middle marginalist worldview, which is a moderate worldview. This is the spectrum that was designed and developed by Talcott Parsons that he set forth. And what I did is when I looked at this thing, I said, it occurs to me that in fact he's leaving out this is what I did my master's thesis on, that there is a right middle marginalist position and a left middle marginalist position, which is the classic conservative and liberal worldviews. And that when you insert these in, you actually, if you review the answers to these questions, that, for example, an authoritarian worldview, the way that they come to an authoritarian worldview is that adherents to this particular worldview, they say, look, if in fact the entire universe is just expanding and disintegrating into nothingness, and all there is chaos, that the only way to impose any order on an otherwise chaotic world is through the exercise of the assertion of a major, powerful individual. And so that the individual will assert power over a particular physical geographic area, and he will impose his will upon everyone. And what it does is it provides an ordering principle. And therefore people can understand what's getting ready to happen. And if the person who is an authoritative leader is honest and consistent, they will in fact provide rules and regulations and principles to be adhered to on the part of people. For example, in a feudal area, they'll say, look, that what I'll do is given the limited technology and land and communications and forms of transportation we have, I'm going to have you be in charge of this 100 square mile area, and I'm going to have you be in charge of this other 100 square mile area. I'm going to then hand down some general principles that I think ought to be adhered to within our kingdom here, and that you're going to make sure they get done. And that way we'll have a thing where, for example, the peasants are growing a particular amount of food. You will take 10% of their crop every year, and you will keep 5% of that, and then you'll give me the other 5%. And so you'll pass it up the line. So they set up an entire kind of feudal type of system that is predicated upon in either an authoritarian or an authoritative leader, because they don't believe that there is discernible by an exercise of our five senses and our rationality applied to it, that you can't really discern any kind of operative principles that could function as a referent by means of which you can really determine what's good or bad. And so that you have to have a person, either benign or otherwise, impose order upon an otherwise chaotic world. So in that sense, you can see how in this one particular worldview, at least, in the right systematist, authoritative or authoritarian worldview, how a belief in that particular cosmological and teleological set of principles can really function. And so what you discover is that as you go down as you go across actually on this oh, we already have one of these guys over here. That as you go down the line and you move from the right systematist to the right marginalist, as I said, I had inserted into this in my master's thesis a right middle marginalist and a left middle marginalist position, which is your classic conservative and liberal position. But in the right marginalist one, you had a reactionary worldview. Now you ask the question. What's your name? Tyler?
Yes.
Tyler, you asked the question. So how do you get a different worldview if you answer these questions, if you answer these major cosmological questions in a different manner?
That was not what I was asking.
Okay. Well,
I mean, ultimately what I'm getting at is why is there already presupposed to be two absolutely opposed coherences? Or like why are there presupposed to be only a certain number of coherent
what he did is he said, at least Talcott Parsons said, that he had ascertained this from interviewing tens of thousands of different people in different communities. It was allegedly an inductive process in which he kind of interviewed everybody and he found them falling into these categories.
So wouldn't it already be founded on one of the 5 philosophies in his spectrum?
Well, it's interesting because Talcott Parsons, didn't attribute these things to his categories. He did it completely inductively. He said, look, I've just gone through this process and I've discovered that when you find in these different communities, they tend to divide themselves into these groups.
So doesn't that already presume that his methodology is independent of this analysis?
Oh yes. In fact, his methodology was allegedly completely inductive. Is that he just went around and interviewed all the people, and when he looked at all of the data and started ascertaining what was going on, he asked them a whole series of other questions that had to go.
So then wouldn't the entire left-right dichotomy ultimately already be divided on an inductive premise?
Well, you're getting ahead of us right now. You're getting ahead of us appropriately because what is actually being asserted here eventually is that there is something going on that is completely unconscious, okay? And that there's a real operative phenomenon going on here. And that we'll get to that, but you're asking the exact right questions as to where this thing is going. And it does go there. And that it makes you crazy if you don't know that early on. But I don't want you to be crazy yet. I just want you to be really inquisitive about, just like you are, about what's going on here. Yes.
I feel like this implies. Sorry, I feel like this implies that like human nature and like a single person's mindset is static. I feel like maybe you would answer those questions differently at 4 o'clock than at 11 p.m. when you're hanging out with different people, and like you're in a different scenario. Like, oh, 1 week later you moved. I feel like a person's answers to these questions and maybe their response and where they would lie on a graph can vary if they're in a different situation.
Well, actually, there's a little bit more radical insight to this, and that is that it doesn't make any difference what you tell a person about a lot of the logistical facts. They don't give a shit. The fact is they're going to do just exactly what they're going to do, and it's kind of unconscious and instinctive, and they'll make up all kinds of good reasons for doing it. For example, if you take a right-wing Republican and you show them that the Sandinista government is supported by church people and that they're engaged in sharing and giving food to people and education to people, etc., and that the Nicaraguan dictator Anastasio Somoza, who'd been in there and his father and grandfather for eons, put in power in 1906 by an American military coup. If you explain all that to them and say, oh, therefore, you're thinking that these people are communists that are going to be basically subjecting everybody to a gulag, is completely irrational. And you get through explaining all that to them, and they'll go, I still think they're communists, and they're going to put everybody in a gulag. And that is the radical conclusion that was reached by Parsons, in that therefore you're attempting to just put people in a jury box or something and show them little pieces of evidence isn't going to change their mind. If you put a bigot onto the stand or into a jury box, they're going to come up with the decision is preordained as to what they're going to do, and you can't move them off from that. And that's exactly what the radical conclusion was that Ralph Potter was trying to tell us. Okay? And the idea that you have, that I hear you saying, is that, well, I may answer a given question on, Saturday morning after I've been out all night getting drunk, in a particular way on Saturday morning, but when I'm all completely rested up and healthy and stuff on a Wednesday, afternoon, I'll answer it a different way. Well, what that means is that you're unstable.
That's what I'm saying. I feel like that just implies, so one person's principles are this. You believe this for the cosmological argument. You believe this for the ontological argument.
Yep.
And I feel that, no, that could change. You meet one new person, you get a new perspective. I feel like it's just not static. Like, your principles are not static.
Okay, well, all I'm saying is that these are the most fundamental, factual questions that you can almost conceive of having to come up with some answer for. And it may be that a person can change their fundamental assumptions about these facts. And that's what Ralph Potter says. What he's saying to you is that, look, don't think that you're going to be able to persuade a person who is a systemic thinker. Now, there's all kinds of people who are not systemic thinkers. In the same way there's all kinds of people that can sing, and there's people who can't. There's people who sing off tune, off key all the time. Okay, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a correct way of singing, that there aren't a correct set. This is the exact issue you're dealing with. That if there's an exact set of tones, of pure tones of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, you can have those pure tones. There's a certain vibrational frequency of those tones, and a person can be completely tone deaf, and they can sing completely off key all the time, and it's okay as far as they're going, but they're not going to get a very good response from their fellow citizens.
But you're putting the off key on your own constraints. What if to them their key is what, you're off key says you.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
who are you?
You're off key because everybody in the room will tell you so. And not only will they tell you so, but you go somewhere else and they'll also tell you so. Because you're getting at the exact same question Tyler was getting at indirectly. And that is there something going on that causes everybody to recognize when someone is on tune and when they're not? That's the real question here. And that's what we're dealing with here, having to do with thinking and philosophies, is that sometimes it may be a little more obvious when a person can't sing than it is that a person can't think straight.
But just like cultures change and the sounds change. You go to Africa, they use click. When they talk, they probably put that into their songs. You go to Europe or they're not going to have that. So just like you said, everyone in the room can't sing. Well, if you go to a different country, maybe you would be off tune in that country. They sing with different vocals. Every human doesn't sing the same. Every culture doesn't sing the same. I don't think they think the same either.
Well, but the reality is that there are huge cultures that all end up functioning in the same way, and they sing according to a certain scale. They recognize certain colors. I mean, it may well be that if someone puts up a spectrum, that you may not see it as red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, and violet. You may not see it that way at all. But the fact of the matter is, virtually everybody else does. And so what we're driving at here is that there are certain physiological or phenomenological functions going on inside human beings that people are quite ready to acknowledge, as a rule, are not working quite right. If they can't recognize colors, or they can't see certain light, or they can't see things from a certain distance away. So like when you say, you may have, 20/40 vision, but the fact is 20/20 vision is what most everybody has, and so most everything in the culture is adjusted to that kind of level of seeing, and street signs are made that way and everything else. You may not be able to see them, and then you go and get glasses to try to adjust that. And what we're talking about here, the fundamental question that we're inquiring into here is whether or not, and it's a fact question, whether or not there are certain physiological phenomena going on in human beings that cause them to attach themselves to one or another set of these beliefs. Because one of the extraordinary things about these fundamental premises is that nobody knows for sure what the answer is. You see? But the fact of the matter is that almost everybody comes to some sort of intuitive conclusion in the back of their mind, an unconscious decision about what the answers to those questions are for themselves. And they don't spend a lot of time studying it. They don't spend a lot of time talking about it or having formal discussions about it, but they end up coming to share a certain set of beliefs about these fundamental questions. And for that reason, they react in a very particular and predictable way when they're confronted by a given problem. They'll respond that way, okay? And what they're doing is they're telling us, at least they were telling us at that time at Harvard University, that based upon their observations over a long period of time, this is what they think is going on. Okay, and so they were asking us to sort of familiarize ourselves with this. I want anybody and everybody to challenge these things. You're not supposed to just sit here and just drink the Kool-Aid. I'm saying that what you're doing is that I'm trying to lay out for you what it is that Harvard University was telling us about how you evaluate reality and how people respond evaluating reality.
It seems like this is sort of the problem that a lot of analytic philosophy and a lot of science also runs into, which is just the fact that inductive reasoning is easy. Like if you're looking for a system to apply, you can apply a system to almost anything. If you want to say, what types of political people are there, you'll be able to find, specific types. And so I guess the question sort of becomes like, what's the point or what's the value of stratifying something that we're discussing as a spectrum? We're using the word political spectrum, but when we stratify it to 5, and like Tyler brought up the importance of having 2 endpoints to that spectrum, I think it sort of negates the whole purpose of conceiving a spectrum, of understanding that there are people all over the place. And I think that those are a lot of the concerns that we're sort of discussing right now, that people are mutable and their principles are mutable, and I'm not sure why. Is the point to formulate a principle in the form of maxims that you can apply systematically to your life? Because that also seems to fall into the same sort of traps.
Well, or everybody could go through their life every single moment having to make a completely de novo decision about everything. You can, which tends to degenerate into chaos. Is that people don't obey the same street signs, people don't care about red lights,
we wouldn't have had Beethoven or Stravinsky or Gesualdo or, the great musicians were horrible because they broke all the rules. So I think that I really disagree with your point earlier about music, that if you sing off key, everyone in the room will tell you you're singing off key. I think that's true, but I think that the room is sort of spaceless and timeless in that way, both with philosophy, politics, and music. In this way, there is no wrong answer, because as soon as your breakthrough, your personal discovery that is wrong by whatever other standards connects on any sort of level, it becomes legitimized. And so the norms of human political consciousness, as well as like creative consciousness, are defined as humanity progresses.
And in fact, there is an argument to be made on behalf of aimless relativism. There is. You could actually become a champion of aimless relativism. You could. And you say, look at, and that's why some people are complete anarchists. They think that any attempt on the part of any type of community or classroom or anything else to come to some kind of a consensus and think that others somehow have an obligation to abide by that is what the whole discussion's about. The whole idea of political philosophy, the whole idea of political theory, the whole idea of philosophy is to try to determine whether or not there is any source of legitimacy for a community, a collective community, to require another individual to refrain from acting in a particular way, or an obligation to act in a particular way. So you got your finger right on it. Your instinct is perfectly correct, is to say, wait a second, who the hell is anybody to tell me that I'm singing off key? You know? Or who is anybody, in a certain sense, to tell you that you can't have sexual relations with a 3-year-old? I mean, who the hell do people think they are? Trying to tell you something like that, okay? And you could make the exact same argument that you're making right now in defense of yourself, okay? So what we're asking in this class is, what about the other end of this thing? What about when you have a structure, a state, that in fact arrogates unto itself the authority to mandate that people conduct themselves in such a way in which a substantial plurality of the people in the community feel that they're being treated unjustly, and to the point where they're going to rebel against that, and they're going to set up some kind of another system that stops that kind of thing from happening. Okay, and so those are exactly the right questions that you're asking and that you ask, Tyler. Those are the exact right questions, is that, you know, who do these people think they are? And the answer to that, the short answer to that would be, they're the people that teach at Harvard University that think they run the world. You know? And that's what they do. They train people to run the world. And there's also, they do the same kind of thing over at Yale. You know, and so that they have the debate back and forth between whether Hillary Clinton or Jeb Bush or Bill Clinton or who it is from Harvard or Yale or wherever are going to run the world this term. You know, and so what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how we protect ourselves, your legitimate instinct, against being coerced into doing something that we don't think is right, or being prevented from doing something that we think we have a right to do. And so that we're inquiring into that right now. Okay, Sophia.
Okay. So I just wanted to point out that some of what you guys seem to be arguing against is the idea of absolute classification schemes. But the thing is that nobody has really thought of classification schemes in science or philosophy in that way for the better part of a century. Looking at the philosophy of science, which is also a field that uses a lot of these same sorts of classifications. You look at biological taxonomy. The thing is, you're right. This can't be absolutely applied, but just like a scientific theory can never fully be accepted as true, science and philosophy are all about making reasonable approximations that fit in most cases.
Yeah, but we're using it as a basis for imposing on other people.
That's right, and that's exactly why the instinct that you guys have is exactly the right one, because the fact is that it's preferable to err on the side of individual liberty and freedom than it is to err on the side of the authoritative power of the state.
Point.
So that's all perfectly legitimate. Okay, what I'm pointing out, however, is that this is how their thinking goes at Harvard University, and this is how they're training their would-be governors. It's important to remember that Harvard College was started actually as a school for training leaders in the colonies. the young men were taken there and trained to be governors and other things of the colonies. And so they've got this kind of long-standing attitude about themselves, in that they're sharing it. And so what we're trying to do is to figure out where the weak points are in this thing, and whether or not natural law, which is this basic concept that I'm trying to share with you here, can serve us as a mechanism and a methodology by means of which we can protect our individual freedom. Okay? And so I'm just elucidating for you on their end of the spectrum how they go about determining that they have a right to tell people what to do. For example, just stop and think of it. If everybody here in the state of California all had a plebiscite and 99% of us voted to secede from the United States, and that we have a right, as the 5th largest economy on the planet, to run our own affairs, and we don't have to be gathering tax money together and sending it to Washington, D.C. to let them, invade Afghanistan. And that the fact is, if we decided we were going to withdraw and have our own governing compact, what are your thoughts about that? Do you think it would be legitimate for the federal government to come in and try to insist that we stay in the Union? That we conduct ourselves every year to send, X percent of our money, to Washington, D.C. to be spent however the way they want to? Or not? How do you construct an argument either for or against that? That's what we're exploring here. And what I'm saying is that there is an underlying assumption on the part of the governing elite that there are certain physiological, phenomenological factors functioning in the human family that make us predictable, and that they can in fact figure out how you stimulate a group of people and they will react in a particular way, and that they can tell that that's going on. And what they're trying to do is train their young leaders in understanding what those presuppositions are that people have, so that they can be stimulated to function in a predictable manner and lend order to a culture and be able to get along with each other adequately in a culture, so that they're not taking up guns and killing each other, or knives and cutting off each other's heads, etc. Okay, so that's what this is all about, and that's why a course like this is so important, and that's why it's so important that you ask questions just like that, as I'm rolling along here, elucidating for you what their line of thinking is. Okay, so I'm happy that you asked that.
This is fascinating because it seems like these questions explain the reasons that people make decisions on reasoning and philosophy. Can you go back and explain if the left systematic side of this kind of spectrum has an inherently opposed cosmology? And those, before we take more questions?
That's what we're going to do. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to show you the ones that are like right next door. For example, here let's take a look. Here are these questions again, and let's take a look at the right marginalists. Okay, the people that are reactionaries, that they have a cosmological. They have a cosmological belief that, yes, indeed, the universe began with a big bang. It is indeed disintegrating and expanding at the same time. And it will, in fact, reach a point where every ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire universe stands apart and separate from every other one. But what they assume instinctively is that rather than at that point it will just continue by dint of the momentum to expand into nothingness and disintegrate entirely, lending chaos to the whole universe. What they believe is that at that point where every ultimately irreducible integer of matter stands separate and apart from every other one, the impetus that had been imposed upon those units of matter by the initial Big Bang will have completely expired. And that they will stand in stasis for a brief microsecond, and then the attraction of every single one of them for every other one will in fact then be unopposed by the expansive impetus, and that therefore they will begin to move back toward each other. This is that long experiment that, if you take a huge wooden a huge wooden ball and suspend it by a carborundum wire from the end of one end of a gymnasium, and you go clear to the other end of the gymnasium, and you suspend a little tiny wooden ball from a carborundum wire, and you release the little ball, it'll move toward the big one. There's actually an attraction that they have for each other. The big ball will move a teeny tiny bit toward the little ball as well. But that is the basic law of physics, is that all matter in the universe, every integer of matter is attracted to every other integer of matter in the entire physical universe, and that the degree of attraction is inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. That's that thing that we learned back in high school physics, okay? Or college physics, depending on whether you're in that group. I don't think there's a lot of are there physics majors here. We have our guy. Yes. Okay. So the bottom line is that the second paradigm people believe that there is in fact a process. The teleological belief is that what's going to happen is that then the integers of matter in the universe are going to start collapsing back in toward each other, and the leptons are going to join together and form muons, and the muons are going to join together and form electrons. They're going to join together and form protons and neutrons in atoms of matter. And then they're going to form compounds and mixtures and planets and star systems and galaxies, and it's going to go on again. It's going to happen. They're going to collapse back in upon each other, and there's going to come a point in time where every ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe is going to be in direct physical contact with every other one. And at that point, there's the big crunch, as distinct from the Big Bang. There's a big crunch. They all crunch down in, and they're all together the size of a head of a pin. And at that moment, they believe that the polarity of attraction instantly reverses itself, and every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the universe repels every other one. And you have a repeat of the Big Bang. As I said, and then you have that whole process take place again. And this is what they refer to, I told you before, it's called the magnum annus. It is the great year. The great periodos. It's the oscillation, one full oscillation of the cosmos. And in the process of the expansion and in the process of the collapse back into each other, there occurs a period of time in different parts of the universe where the confluences of mass and energy end up being in the right ratio, and consciousness arises again. And so that it manifests again. Okay, so that these people believe that their cosmology is that the universe did not, in fact, begin at a particular point and is not going to be ending at a particular point. It, in fact, is eternal, and it is eternally oscillating between a state of absolute mass and absolute energy, and that this is the matrix within which we come into consciousness. That we end up being physically manifest. And conscious. And that therefore they believe, but one of the problems of this is that they believe that this happens completely mechanically. This is that old thing of, the predestination. Everything is prearranged, just like with the billiard ball. The old billiards, if you hit the billiard ball or the cue ball at a particular rate and hit them at a particular rate, everything is predictable because they all react completely physically to each other. And that therefore, if you knew the exact configuration of the compressed universe with every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in contact with each other if you knew their exact locations to each other and the degree of force that was imposed upon them in repelling each other, you could predict everything that's going to be happening throughout the entire expansion and contraction of that universe. And what they believe is that it happens over and over and over again. This is that weird thing that you heard them talking about in True Detectives. that you probably didn't have time to watch that because you're in school, okay? But the bottom line is that there is a major, profound philosophy of the eternal return. The constant repetition of the eternal return that goes on, and that it happens mechanically, and people are predestined. Okay, and so there's a whole set of beliefs that go on in here. And now, from an epistemological point of view, one of the extraordinary things about this is that the epistemological assumption of the adherence to the second paradigm worldview is that we can sense as human beings this reality of the expansion and contraction of the universe, just like a heartbeat, that it's an organic, functioning entity, the universe, and that we are an integral part of it, and that we have a deep, intuitive, experiential sense of the oscillation of the universe. And that, in fact, provides a referent which the first paradigm adherents don't believe exists, because they believe it's all just disintegrating into nothingness and it was all chaos. But in fact, the adherents to the second paradigm worldview believe that there is an ordering principle in the universe. And this ordering principle is the Tao, is the dialectic, that there is a dialectical process going on between mass and energy at any given time. And that the only way you can really lend meaning to your life that otherwise is meaningless in a world that is subject just to complete mechanical repetition is by determining which side of the dialectic you're going to be on. And then you gain meaning from that. So you have to understand how powerful this particular conceptual metaphor is, because the dividing of every community into teams, the red team, the blue team, NCAA, March Madness, everybody going crazy, Duke, playing Wisconsin or Kentucky, or they're all playing each other, but they're all dressed up in different colored uniforms and chasing a ball around the field, okay, or sticking a ball in a basket, and people are going crazy on both sides. And they find it really meaningful. And I should tell you this important story that Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist, she was down in in the islands in New Guinea. She was down in New Guinea in the late 1940s, and she discovered a tribe existing way out on one of the islands that had no contact with the outside world at all. And so they set up an observation post way up high on a mountain with these telephoto lenses, and they were watching the tribe. What happened is the tribe had wandered off and divided itself so that there was one group of the tribe lived up on this side of the hills, and this other group lived on the other side of the valley up on the hills. And what they would do is their hunters would wander down onto the floor of the valley, and they would hunt during the period, and then they would eventually bump into each other while they were hunting parties out hunting, and they would have a fight. And they would fight until one person had been killed. And as soon as one person was killed, they would stop. And the side that had lost the person would pick the person up and bring them back to their side of the valley, and they would have this huge funeral dirge, and covering themselves with ashes and crying and moaning and carrying the person around, and then set them on fire, in this big burial scene. And on the other side of the valley, the people who had vanquished that person would go back to their side of the valley, and they would have a huge orgy. And they'd be eating and drinking and getting intoxicated, and everybody having sexual intercourse with each other, and jumping and dancing. Okay? And she discovered, after watching this for a period of time, that they were taking turns. They would alternate between each of the two sides in getting to do the funeral rites or the big pagan celebration. And she said to herself, my, isn't this peculiar? What a strange phenomenon for our human family to do. And what she's suggesting, and what others are suggesting, is that our human family, that a number of people are really taken by this dialectic, and that they feel it very instinctively, and they tend to constantly be dividing the world into good guys and bad guys. and that there's the A team and the B team, and they derive great sense of satisfaction and euphoria and despair, in winning and losing in this contest. And that this can be a constructive phenomenon, or it can be a destructive phenomenon. But this is a fundamentally different cosmology, and a different teleology, and a very different epistemology, which distinguishes the right systematist from the right marginalists. Okay, so then the question that you ask is, well, what about on the other end of the spectrum? Okay, what we discover at the other end of the spectrum is that what the left systematists believe over here is they believe that in fact the universe abides in an infinite and eternal sea of completely undifferentiated consciousness. That it just stays in a state of absolute unconditioned consciousness, but at some point the infinite and unconditioned consciousness enfolded into being the original unit of matter. And that this unit of matter was the initial condensed form of the universe, which in fact then opened up and blossomed into the fully expanded universe with all the material and consciousness in it. And it will then gather together and collapse back in upon itself, and it will then either that, or else it will expand out into disintegration, in which all of our individuated sense of consciousness will meld together with the infinite and eternal consciousness, just like we're all on an acid trip that I've read about. That this is. That all of a sudden, one's sense of separate selfness has completely disappeared. And yet, you're still there. Only you're not there. You just are. You are unconditioned. You are in a state of unconditioned being, which in fact is the unconditioned being, which is not a noun, it's a verb. And it's a non-transitive verb of being. And that this is the fundamental cosmological assumption of the left systematists. These people are theists, or what we would characterize as theists, because they believe in an infinite, absolute and infinite being, and as long as they don't degenerate into starting to think about it as a noun, because they got trapped by the Catholic Church or someone else, into nounifying what is in fact an unconditioned state of being, then these people have a cosmology, and the teleology is one of eschaton. That in fact we're going to be evolving from this dense, enmeshed condition of being trapped in our material instincts of lust and vengeance and fear and everything, that we're going to be evolving over time as the universe expands and the frequency increases. We're going to be expanding to the point where we ultimately transcend and return to a state of unconditioned being, of bliss. Okay? And that the ontological assumption of these people is that the experience that you have at the core of your being, when properly freed from its materialist encasement and feeling of entrapment in your material condition, that in fact that nodule of consciousness is in fact completely unitary with the infinite and eternal being. And that therefore you have infinite and eternal being at the core of your true being. But it's not a separate self. It is in fact a part of the infinite and eternal. And that they postulate that you can actually discern this. If you can quiet the stimuli around you, and you can silence the chichareri going on in your brain of constantly worrying about whether you're going to get your laundry done this week, or you've got to take a test, or you have to study, read something. If you can get that to stop, and you can get yourself into a state of just centralized calm, then in fact you will start to get some kind of access to that state of calm, that unified being. Okay? And that's what the meditation is all about. And that's what the whole different dietetic regimen is all about. You stop eating red meat because it uses up, 3/4 of your energy just trying to digest it, and stop killing animals and tearing their leg off and eating it. This kind of stuff. I didn't mean to offend all you meat eaters because I'm one myself, and so I understand the conditioned state of our consciousness. Okay, and so that's what the people, or the left systematists, in fact, have a thoroughly systematic way of looking at the universe. And their epistemology is this thing I'm talking about. They believe that there is, in fact, a faculty which you can free up and you can assert, which is in the pituitary, that it's actually, you can stimulate that through different meditative techniques and dietary techniques, and you can actually increase the energy envelope around your body, and that this ends up being in sympathetic resonance with a unified field that bonds the entire cosmos together. And so that they have a very clear cosmological, teleological, ontological, instead of epistemological beliefs, which you can see are categorically different than those of the right systematists, and categorically different from the right marginalists. Okay? And so you begin to see how it is that the beliefs that one has with regard to these four major pillar beliefs can in fact influence what the principle is that you work from in attempting to make ethical decisions about your life. You see, someone's hand was up. Yes?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because it's really easy to apply this system to modern political, the U.S. at least political geography that I'm used to, with progressives, this utopian idea of doing no harm and stuff like that, which I think is often sort of at least a westernized, if not like sort of commodified version of a lot of Eastern religion, spirituality and spiritualism. And I'm wondering if this system, this five-part worldview system, applies to those sort of worldviews of doing no wrong globally, not just in the U.S. Like,
well, one would think that it does, and let me just in kind of closing on this point suggest that there is some sense in which there is a belief about this that functions in the following manner. Does anybody recognize what that is? Those are the chakras. Those are the energy centers, the neurological bundles located inside the human body that it is postulated by the Taoists, by the Buddhists, by the Hindus, and others in the Eastern philosophies and religious traditions that are actual centers of vibrational frequency in the body, and that each of them generates a respective energy envelope around the human body, and it has a particular frequency, vibrational frequency, and that there is therefore a set of these vibrational frequency.
What do you mean by vibrational frequency?
I mean by vibrational frequency vibrational frequency. That there's actually an energy field. There's an actual bioplasma around the human body that actually vibrates at a particular frequency, and that it can be discerned. And that there are various experiments that have been conducted in all types, like Duke University and Downstate Medical Center, et cetera, studying this particular thing, because they believe that if in fact one is what they refer to as out in one of these centers, for example, this center here, this is the dialectical center, this is the center of bipolarity, this is the center for sexuality, the actual drive to engage in sexual relations, that this is, in fact, if this is overstimulated, then a person is out of balance, and that they conduct themselves in a way that is dominated by and controlled by that particular chakra. Now, I raise this only in response to your question, but in fact, Tyler, you will recognize now that there is some suggestion that there's something going on that people may well be completely unconscious of, and that it is actually causing them to attach themselves to one or another of these particular beliefs here, even though there's no definitive proof as to what the answer is to any one of these things. And yet there are people who harbor very strong intuitive feelings or beliefs about the answer to these questions. And that what is being suggested by some is that it is because of this. And that if you don't know it, and you don't know that this is functioning inside your body, and you don't know how to get access to it, and you don't know how to train it, and you don't know how to experience it, you're basically bumping along singing off key. Because what they're suggesting is that there is in fact some ultimate referent of being out of tune. That there are very specific frequencies that have been discerned in each of these major energy centers in the human body by scientific study of studying people who have perfected certain types of capacities. And they can do, there are all kinds of things that they refer to as siddha, that are manifestations of a perfectly balanced chakra energy system. That there are things that can be done by these people, and virtually all of the major prophets in the various modes of spiritual expression that flow from these worldviews actually manifest. That they have energy fields around them. They're portrayed as having halos or bright radiant energy around their body. They're consistently reported of manipulating mass and energy, that they can actually manifest different things. They can actually levitate. They do all kinds of things. And what happens is an entire religious belief system built up all around them. And the prophets try to tell them the same thing over and over again, that it has to do with this stuff, and that you're not getting it. You know, you're not paying adequate attention to it. And what philosophy is all about, very peculiarly, it's an attempt on the part of people who are almost completely dominated by their intellect. They're almost completely dominated by it, of trying to figure out what the hell's going on. You know, but they're trying to figure it out all from outside. They're saying something's happening here. I know something's happening here, but I can't figure out what it is. So maybe we can dominate it and control it. And but what they end up doing basically is arguing that the people who are really correct are themselves, the intellectual community. But remember that intellectus, the Latin root of the intellect, intellectus is the ability to distinguish the difference between. And that is why, for functioning from the intellect, you can in fact recognize the difference between you here, you there, you there, and we can actually figure out intellectually the kind of relationship that exists there, kind of a mathematical relationship of space and distance, and you can come up with algorithms of reality. And that, of course, ends up starting to characterize the third paradigm worldview, which is over here. Is the actual right middle marginalists, the conservatives. These are the existentialists. And these are the people that believe that you can figure out, if you can figure out the past well enough and discern patterns of conduct, you can turn and rationally project them into the future, and as long as you retain the same algorithm, everything will work okay. And that's the group that, in fact, tends to project onto an otherwise aimlessly expanding universe and disintegrating, or imposing upon an otherwise completely mechanical, repetitious expansion and contraction of the universe. They believe that by projecting onto an otherwise mechanical oscillation of the universe, human will, we can actually turn aside through our own collective physical endeavors together, we can turn aside the otherwise mechanically predictable consequences of our life. For example, that we don't have to terminate here on this planet when in fact the sun collapses, because we can figure out how to get up off the planet and go find other planets and inhabit other planets. That we have, through the power of our intellect, they believe, the ability to overcome an otherwise meaningless universe, to the first paradigm adherents, in an arbitrary and capricious, repetitive universe of the second paradigm. That there's a third paradigm worldview that by making existential decisions through the use of our intellect, we can in fact alter the course of our human destiny. And so you'll start to see that there are differing worldviews.
Do you think that the third paradigm worldview could be used underlying the methodology used to create this spectrum?
Do I think it can do what?
Do you think that the third paradigm worldview could be used to outline a political spectrum just like this one?
I do think so, yes.
So, do you think that, the methodology that was used to construct this political spectrum could be attributed to a third paradigm worldview?
To a conservative worldview?
Yeah, right, middle, RMM, conservative, yeah.
Well, the thing...
It seems like the methodology, just that the methodology used is ultimately, by constructing this spectrum, it separates itself out from it, and it says that intellectually we can ultimately determine the way that we want the society to go that way.
Well, that's right. No, they do. And worse than that is that the existentialists believe that the actual only source of making that decision is just the act of making it. That they will acknowledge to you that there's no ultimate referent for right and wrong, and it's just that our ability to make a conscious decision. So if we make a decision that is just internally and self-referentially consistent with a given discerned algorithm, that in fact we can control our destiny, but that there's no ultimate ground of right or wrong. And that's one of the major afflictions of the third paradigm existential worldview. That's why you get all the lamenting, of Jean Anouilh and Jean Genet and all the rest of them in Waiting for Godot, and wringing their hands and being uncomfortable with a rock in their shoe. The whole things that go on in Waiting for Godot. That these existential plays that are put on by the French mostly. But this is what I've just done in this class. Is I just wanted to get in front of you a basic understanding of where the worldview fits in, because what we're talking about here is the left marginalist worldview is where we're going. We've done the right systematist, the right marginalist, the left systematist. What I want to do is I want to deal in the next class with the left marginalist worldview, which is the progressive worldview, which is the radical monist worldview. This is the ancient worldview that gives rise to the natural law worldview. Okay? That it is not, it refrains from being theistic. It does not postulate any particular premise with regard to what obtains outside of the ultimate perimeters of the physical universe. It doesn't postulate the existence of an infinite and eternal sea of consciousness. It doesn't postulate that the infinite and eternal sea of consciousness enfolded into being the material universe. It doesn't postulate any particular eschaton of the ultimate dissolution of individuated consciousness into the sea of undifferentiated consciousness. But what it does do is it postulates the existence of a radical monad, that the universe, the biophysical universe that exists, is made up of the sum total of mass and energy, and that we are in it and part of it, and that we are capable of discerning subtle dimensions and vibrational frequencies inside the unitary universe that in fact can function as a referent, an experientially grounded referent for right and wrong. Because this is ultimately the postulate that you hear Crane Brinton referring to. Okay, and so that what I want to do is on Thursday, I want to direct our attention to this particular worldview, the source of the natural law theory of justice.
So the only thing is, like, then couldn't that kind of natural law still be used to commit these same sorts of injustices that we're talking about on a daily basis?
If in fact misinterpreted, yes. But every tool can be turned into a weapon. And that doesn't mean that one should refrain from inventing a hoe to be able to hoe a garden, just because somebody can use it to cut someone's head open, you know. And so this is the task that I'm assigning to you. The task is to try to figure out whether or not it is a legitimate undertaking to create these tools by means of which the collective can rationalize and justify imposing mandates on other individuals, or whether or not we are at base left with the only moral option of having every single person get to do whatever it is they feel like, and as long as they can get away with it, it's perfectly okay. So that they can lie or cheat or steal or rape or pillage, and as long as they don't get caught, there's no problem. Okay? And so that what we want to do is we want to take up this discussion on Thursday of this whole issue of the left marginalist worldview, the progressive radical monist worldview, and track it back into its origins in ancient Greece and track it on up through. And as I say, you might take a look at that big article by Dr. Roman, R-O-M-M-E-N, The Natural Law, A Study in Legal and Social History and Philosophy. Just take a look at it because it'll show you kind of the evolution of this idea. Okay? And I'm sorry I ate into our question and answer time, but on Thursday, okay?
I have a question for you. Like,